Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to the second channel flying video, and at time of making this particular one, the first Airbus A380s are being torn apart literally just for the scrap, engines and metal, all the other things that make up one of these planes. And sadly, this is not going to be a one-off incident, and it's expected that over the next few years we'll see this happen more and more. But it wasn't meant to be that way. The A380 was unveiled in 2000 and Singapore Airlines was the launch customer, using it for the first commercial service just 7 years later. It was the largest passenger airplane in the world at the time, and despite 12 years having passed since then, it still is entirely unrivaled in that regard. It's a marvel in terms of passenger comfort. Many are outfitted with literal bars where you can go up and grab a drink and maybe some bar snack. Most of them also have storage spaces on the side of the seat, and the plane is literally a double-decker, meaning that when you receive your seat number, you'll also be given a floor number, because that's a thing you might need to know about. Are you on the upper deck or the lower deck? That is a genuine question you have to ask with the A380. So how is it then that a plane so far ahead of its competition is being destroyed for scrap metal? And the answer to that is economics. But let me elaborate, because when the A380 was envisioned, hub-to-hub flying was at an all-time high. This was before the days of budget airlines and their point-to-point flights, which will generally take you direct to your destination without a layover or second flight being required. In fact, many of them don't do layovers, many of them don't have this second flight model. They just sell you a ticket from one place to another, usually for a low cost, because they're called budget airlines. Wow, did you work that out yourself? Anyway, with that said, to give a practical example of the difference between the two, in case you're curious, what is the difference between hub-to-hub flying and point-to-point? Let's take two British Airways routes. One is from London to New York, and one is from London to Pittsburgh, which is just over 500 kilometers away. London to New York, as you might imagine from the fact that they're the largest cities on both of their respective continents, is a pretty big route. It's literally a billion-dollar route in terms of the revenue made every single year, with over 4 million people making the hop between the two cities, whereas Pittsburgh, for example, receives just a single flight a day, not just to London, but to Europe as a whole. There is a single flight between Pittsburgh and London, whereas the flight of a similar length between New York and London has over 30 different planes flying every single day, 30 different times to choose from, 30 different planes to choose from, because there is a lot more people traveling on that route. In fact, there's over 10,000 people traveling between London and New York every single day, whereas the number from London to Pittsburgh is closer to 100. And in the past, this second route, this one that is so much smaller, would have just been closed, and people would have been routed via New York. And that's exactly what happened between 1999 and 2018, when the route was officially reopened again. British Airways used to fly, and then they started flying again. In that gap in between, what's the point in catering to those 100 customers directly? Why not just put them on those big planes flying between London and New York? There's already so much capacity. Why not also use it as a way to get people between London and Pittsburgh without having to have a second set of operations, a second home base, a second hub, a second set of landing slots, clearances, etc. It just didn't make sense for a lot of reasons, and it's something that a lot of airlines were thinking back in the 90s. Back in the days when the A380 was being envisioned, this was what was happening. A lot of these smaller routes were being closed or not really being considered, because you could just funnel more and more traffic through those hubs where the cost to the airline per seat would be lower because of economies of scale. Fairly well-known concept. The more you make of something, the cheaper it is per unit, and that also applies to flights. When you have a lot of people going somewhere, all of the things which are fixed costs get lower because people are sharing it. Fun economics fact with Toycat, that's how most things work. There are fixed costs which are met by all of the people paying together, and then there are variable costs that everyone pays themselves. This is literally how everything works in the world, and that's why it was just assumed that, okay, all of this economy of scale is leading people through these hubs, hub-to-hub traffic is at an all-time high, and that was the situation under which the A380 was designed under. So what exactly changed then? And to put it simply, the world changed. Budget airlines, or low-cost airlines, changed the landscape of commercial aviation entirely. Flying used to be a thing of the rich, the famous, I guess we could call it the ultra-rich. It was a thing you did if you had a lot of money, and to some extent, in some countries, that is still true to this day. However, in regions of the world where budget airlines exist, generally speaking, the average cost of an airfare ticket is so much lower. Take, for example, the fact that the average cost of a plane ticket in North America is $400, whereas in Europe, it's closer to $40, and you can start to realize that, oh yeah, there's a big difference between when you have budget airlines and when you don't. And they're not just charging low fares because they can, they're not just coming up with low numbers. The thing that budget airlines did to change the world was they didn't accept high landing fees as a cost of doing business. Airlines like Ryanair would aggressively negotiate, and they would just refuse to fly there if their demands weren't met. For example, the connection model, which is also popular with every single major airline from the 20th century, that is a thing that is not done by budget airlines for the most part. If you want to fly from somewhere to somewhere, you'll fly there. If you want a connection, buy a second ticket. But they refuse to accept the, the costs of the transfer, the cost of all these sorts of things. They'd rather just sell people direct tickets. And because of this, rather than having this confusing world where the less of an airline's services you wanted, you would pay more. If you wanted a direct flight, you'd pay more than for an indirect flight because they were basing it on what you'd pay, not based on the cost. Budget airlines tried to bring the cost of delivering services in line with the costs of actually providing those services. And when budget airlines spend all of their time, Ryanair's notable for this, but when budget airlines spend all their time trying to lower every single one of their costs literally all the time, you can start to imagine fares go down, and the point-to-point model where you don't connect at all, that is something which goes significantly up. And to give a good example of this, if you want to go between London and Halifax, Nova Scotia, if you want to go between these two major cities, what you'd previously have to do before budget airlines is you'd fly, British Airways from London to New York on that huge, big, thick route, and then you'd fly a smaller plane, maybe with American Airlines, and then you would fly an American airline up to Halifax and finish your journey there. Whereas as soon as the budget airline WestJet came into the game, they started flying direct from London, admittedly London Gatwick, not London Heathrow, but they did fly direct from Halifax to London. They did fly from London direct to Halifax, and in economy, when you're buying the lowest class of service, is the experience really so different between a British Airways and a WestJet, between any budget airline? Is the experience really so bad that you'd be willing to pay more money to take a less direct routing? And collectively, all of us, or to put things simple, the market decided that no, actually, why would I pay more to get less? Why would I pay more money for an inferior service? And in a lot of cases, we're talking about significantly higher amount. To take a random weekend in the middle of September, so booking 4 months in advance, for example, we can see that a direct flight with WestJet would be $600 US, whereas if we want to fly with British Airways, because we prefer their service and we think that's way better, then what we have to do is we have to fly over to Boston, then we connect from Boston to Philadelphia, then we fly from Philadelphia over to Halifax. The journey as a whole takes 24 hours, it costs $500 more, and are you going to take that journey? Are you going to? Be honest with me right here. Do you think it's worth $500 US more? Because if you say no, then it turns out you and the market are in agreement. You and most human beings alive, actually, are in that same agreement. And yeah, to bring this back to the A380, this plane was built in a world of hub-to-hub traffic, in a world where taking that second flight was your only option. There was no low-cost alternative. You would just fly through the hubs because that's what the airlines deemed. It was made to transport up to 700 people in one go, but the world it entered was one of routes which didn't need 700 people. The route between London and Halifax does not fly with 700 people on it. It flies with closer to 150 people each day, and even though the A380 was efficient when it was carrying 700 people at once, carrying 150 makes it much less so. And yeah, add in the enormous sticker price of $250 million US, the high fuel costs of having 4 engines, and suddenly it starts to become a really clear picture as to why this plane doesn't work. It tried to enter into a world where it would be an entirely unique product that, there was no competitor to, but it realistically ended up in a world where its biggest competitors were fairly small planes like the 787 or the A350, which can fit only 200 to 300 passengers, but given that many of these routes which now airlines started to need to open couldn't fit more than that anyway, it started to become a really efficient way to do that. And once you add into the fact that these planes are more fuel efficient than the previous generation, and the fact that more environmentally friendly planes are a big winner, both for the public image, but also for the economics of the airline world, it all suddenly starts coming together as to exactly why many airlines, which were so enthusiastic when this was first released, and which were clamoring over themselves to be one of the first operators of this plane, have suddenly started not only not enjoying it, but very much trying to get rid of it. Because truth be told, there's only one airline for whom the A380 truly worked, and that was Emirates. Funneling a huge number of people through Dubai every single day made the economics of the plane work on a whole different level. By using the plane's economics of scale to scale their operations and get as many people going through Dubai as humanly possible, by using the plane's image to market the airline with things like the airline bar that, got you interested earlier, that's a thing you can still do flying Emirates on most of their routes. By having all of these huge, very long, very thick routes across all of the world, trying to get the world to connect through Dubai, they achieved their goals of getting people to go through Dubai with this plane. And yeah, this is sadly the only real success story of the plane. Both Air France and Singapore Airlines right now are looking to get rid of their planes in as short order as possible, and it's very likely that many other airlines are going to follow as soon as they can. There are so so few airlines who want to commit to a giant A380 purchase with the huge capacity that, comes with it and the huge costs that come with, unsuccessfully filling it, that the price of this Goliath of a jet has slowly spiraled down from a $250 million to closer to zero. And yeah, sadly, a lot of airlines are trying to get rid of it. The market value is just being pushed down and down and down. And when it reaches a low enough point, it becomes worth more for scrap. It becomes worth more for the engines and all of its other components, which is a pretty undignified end to this 19-year project. But it's a reminder that a great idea doesn't always make a great product, at least from the perspective of an airline. If a great product doesn't make any business sense, then it's not a great product. And sadly, that's where the A380 fits. Even if it's a product I really personally like, even if it's something that every single time I've been lucky enough to fly in one of these, or even luckier and flying on the top deck, it's something I've enjoyed every single time. It's something I found wild every single time. Like, I seriously can't express how crazy it was to be like 2 a.m., getting a drink, talking to the bartender, having some sushi, which for some reason was also at the bar. I don't know why that needs to be at the bar, but you get the point that it's an incredible plane, an incredible experience, and there's going to be a lot of experiences over the next 10 to 15 years to fly it. So if you have the option, maybe give it a try next time you see it. Or maybe just, I hope you all enjoyed this video, which taught you about why the A380 is going away and how something which was so loved and so revered is being turned into scrap metal, because that is the way that the world can work sometimes. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a sign that the amount you love something and the amount it's worth are not the same thing, which is why you can't sell your girlfriend for $1 billion. There you go. That's a cute note to end it on. Thank you very much for watching this video. But as always, second channel, don't care. Goodbye.